The United States is a country that has been at war for roughly 228 of the last 245 years, and as a result, it is no stranger to conflict and violence. The most notable examples of American warfare are surely the Second World War and, in recent memory, the so-called Forever Wars in the Middle East. In today's video, I thought it would be interesting to look at 5 of the major conflicts in between those two wars, between 1945 and the turn of the millennium. We'll look at the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the invasion of Grenada in 1983, the Gulf War, and the Yugoslav wars. Whilst this is by no means an exhaustive list of American involvement in wars in this time period, I believe it is a list that hopefully demonstrates some of the more important and era-defining wars that America has found itself fighting in the 20th century. Chapter 1. The Korean War. The Korean War, which took place between 1950 and 1953, was a significant conflict from America's perspective. At the time, the United States found itself at the height of the Cold War, locked in a tense ideological struggle with the Soviet Union and its communist allies. Domestically, the post-World War II period brought about economic growth and prosperity, but it also marked the beginning of a fearful and paranoid era known as the Red Scare. Americans were deeply concerned about the spread of communism, both at home and abroad, and this fear significantly influenced their motivations for entering the war. The war began on June 25, 1950, when North Korean forces, backed by the Soviet Union and China, invaded South Korea. The attack caught the United States and its allies by surprise, yet they swiftly responded, committing to defending South Korea's sovereignty and halting the spread of communism in the region. President Harry S. Truman deemed the intervention necessary to contain the perceived threat of communist expansion and to demonstrate American resolve in the face of aggression. The conflict raged on for 3 long years, leading to a series of major battles and intense warfare. One of the most notable battles was the Battle of Incheon in September 1950, a daring amphibious assault launched by General Douglas MacArthur that turned the tide of the war in favour of the United Nations forces. However, the fortunes of the war fluctuated throughout the conflict, with both sides experiencing significant gains and losses. By mid-1951, the war reached a stalemate, and peace negotiations commenced at Panmunjom. Despite the talks, fighting continued with both sides pushing for advantages on the battlefield. The war finally came to an end 2 years later on July 27, 1953, with the signing of an armistice agreement. It is essential to note that the war technically never ended and is still ongoing, as no formal peace treaty was ever signed, and the Korean Peninsula remains divided to this day. The Korean War was characterised by intense fighting and devastating consequences. The United States, as the primary belligerent on the side of South Korea, experienced significant casualties during the conflict. Approximately 36,574 American service members lost their lives, while more than 100,000 were wounded. On the other side, North Korea and its Chinese allies suffered an estimated 215,000 military deaths, with a much larger number of civilian casualties. Some estimates suggest that it exceeded 2 million. Apart from the main belligerents, the Korean War involved several notable international players. The Soviet Union provided military support to North Korea, while China intervened directly in the war in response to the threat of American forces approaching its borders. Other nations also contributed troops to the United Nations Command, led by the United States. For instance, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia and Turkey sent significant military contingents to assist South Korea in repelling the invasion. The Korean War had profound implications for America and the world. Domestically, the war further fueled the Red Scare, leading to heightened anti-communist sentiment and McCarthyism, a campaign to root out suspected communists within the American government. The conflict also resulted in increased military spending and the build-up of a substantial military-industrial complex, which had lasting effects on American politics and society. Globally, the Korean War marked a pivotal moment in the Cold War, as it reinforced the perception of a divided world between Western democratic nations and Eastern communist states. The war further solidified the United States' commitment to containing communism, leading to increased involvement in other conflicts, such as the Vietnam War. Chapter 2. The Vietnam War. The Vietnam War was a deeply controversial and protracted conflict that had a profound impact on America and the world. The war took place during a time of domestic turbulence and social change in the United States. The 1960s saw the rise of the civil rights movement, the counterculture, and a growing opposition to the government's policies. At the same time, the Cold War intensified, and America's fear of the spread of communism motivated its involvement in the Vietnam conflict. The war officially began in 1955, shortly after the Geneva Accords divided Vietnam into 2 separate countries: North Vietnam, led by Ho Chi Minh and the Communist Viet Minh, and South Vietnam, governed by Ngo Dinh Diem, backed by the United States and anti-communist allies. The United States' primary objective was to prevent the spread of communism in Southeast Asia, following the controversial domino theory, which posited that the fall of one country to communism in one specific area could lead to all its neighbouring countries following suit. The Vietnam War was a grueling and prolonged conflict, lasting for about 19 years until the fall of Saigon in 1975. The war can be divided into three main phases: the early involvement, escalation, and eventual withdrawal. Initially, American involvement was limited to providing financial aid and military advisors to South Vietnam. However, as the conflict escalated, the United States committed more and more troops, reaching a peak of over 500,000 in 1969. Several major battles characterised the Vietnam War. Notably, the Battle of Nha Trang in November 1965 was the first significant engagement between United States and North Vietnamese forces. Another crucial confrontation was the Tet Offensive in 1968, during which the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong launched a coordinated attack across South Vietnam, resulting in a turning point in American public opinion regarding the war. Throughout the war, the United States faced various challenges and setbacks. The guerrilla tactics employed by the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong proved difficult for the conventional US military to counter effectively. The dense jungles and vast tunnel networks of the Viet Cong provided them with strategic advantages, making the conflict particularly brutal and costly. The Vietnam War had a profound social impact on America. The war's televised coverage brought the harsh realities of combat into American living rooms, leading to increased anti-war sentiment and some widespread protests. The draft system, which compelled young men to serve in the military, also sparked public outrage and contributed to the polarisation of society. Casualties on both sides were staggering. The United States lost approximately 58,000 soldiers, with over 150,000 wounded. South Vietnam endured around 230,000 military deaths, while North Vietnam and the Viet Cong suffered an estimated 1.1 to 3.8 million military deaths and millions of civilian casualties. The war also led to the internal displacement of millions of Vietnamese civilians. Apart from the United States and North Vietnam, other significant belligerents were involved in the conflict. North Vietnam received military support from the Soviet Union and China, while the United States had the backing of several anti-communist allies, including South Korea, Australia, and Thailand. In April 1975, North Vietnamese forces captured Saigon, marking the end of the war. The fall of Saigon led to the reunification of Vietnam under communist rule. The war's conclusion was a significant blow to American morale and foreign policy, as it shattered the perception of American military invincibility and raised questions about the validity of the domino theory. Reflecting on the Vietnam War, it was a deeply divisive and costly conflict for America. The war's failure to achieve its objectives and the immense loss of life left a lasting impact on the nation's psyche. The war further deepened the divide between the American people and the government, eroding American foreign policy and interventionism, leading to a more cautious approach in future military engagements. Internationally, the Vietnam War shifted global power dynamics and contributed to the emergence of a multipolar world. It also influenced the development of the anti-war movement and fostered a global sense of solidarity against imperialism and interventionism. Chapter 3: The Invasion of Grenada. The United States invasion of Grenada in 1983 was a significant event that showcased America's assertiveness in protecting its interests in the Caribbean region. At the time of the invasion, Grenada was a possession of the United Kingdom, but its government had experienced internal turmoil and been overthrown in a coup. Concerned about the growing influence of a Marxist government and the construction of a Soviet-supported airport on the island, the United States saw the situation as a potential threat to regional stability and American citizens residing in Grenada. The invasion took place on October 25, 1983, and was codenamed Operation Urgent Fury. The United States' motivations were to rescue American medical students who were studying in Grenada and to prevent the establishment of a communist regime on the island. The Reagan administration also feared that the newly built airport could be used for military purposes by either Cuba or the Soviet Union. The conflict lasted for about 8 days, and the American forces faced resistance from Grenadian and Cuban troops on the island. The major battles included the capture of the Point Salines International Airport, where the American forces successfully overcame opposition and secured the airport. Another key engagement was the battle at Fort Frederick, a strategic location on the island that was also captured by the US forces. During the invasion, the US deployed approximately 7,600 troops, supported by naval and air assets. The initial stages of the invasion were marked by communication and coordination challenges, leading to some casualties among the American forces. However, they quickly gained control of the situation and managed to achieve their objectives. The social impact of the invasion was significant. The American intervention was met with both support and criticism. Supporters argued that it was necessary to safeguard American citizens and to prevent the establishment of a communist regime in Grenada. Critics, on the other hand, saw it as an example of US interventionism and questioned the justification for military action without the approval of the United Nations or regional organisations. Casualties during the invasion were relatively low. The United States reported 19 servicemen killed and 116 wounded. On the Grenadian side, the figures were much higher, with an estimated 45 soldiers and 24 civilians killed. The Cuban government also reported the deaths of 24 Cuban military personnel who were stationed in Grenada at the time of the invasion. The invasion of Grenada had broader implications for America and the world. It further polarised public opinion on American foreign policy and military interventions. The decision to intervene in Grenada was influenced by the Cold War context, with the Reagan administration seeking to demonstrate its resolve in countering communism and supporting anti-communist forces globally. From a global perspective, the invasion raised concerns about unilateral actions by powerful nations, especially without the backing of international bodies. The United Nations General Assembly adopted a resolution deploring the invasion and demanding the withdrawal of foreign troops. Caribbean nations were also critical of the invasion, as they emphasised the need for regional cooperation and diplomacy to address regional conflicts and crises. Chapter 4. The Gulf War. The Gulf War, fought in 1990 to 1991, was a pivotal moment for America. Shaped by the changing global landscape and the aftermath of the Cold War, at the same time the United States was the world's leading superpower, having emerged victorious from the Cold War struggle against the Soviet Union. However, the region surrounding the Persian Gulf became a focal point of concern due to its vast oil reserves and the potential threat posed by Saddam Hussein's Iraq. The war was motivated by Iraq's invasion of Kuwait on August 2, 1990, under Saddam Hussein's claim that Kuwait was historically part of Iraq and that Kuwaiti oil production was harming Iraq's economy. The Gulf War was a relatively short conflict, lasting for just over 7 months. It began with a massive air campaign on January 17, 1991, known as Operation Desert Storm, during which coalition forces, led by the United States, launched airstrikes against Iraqi targets. Major battles include the Battle of Khafiji, a ground engagement in Saudi Arabia near the Kuwaiti border, and a Battle of 73 Easting, a tank battle where American forces achieved a decisive victory over the Iraqi Republican Guard. The progression of fortunes during the war was swift and decisive. The coalition forces led by the United States enjoyed significant technological superiority and had the advantage of a well-coordinated multinational effort. The air campaign devastated Iraq's military infrastructure, crippling its ability to wage war effectively. The ground campaign saw coalition forces advance rapidly, liberating Kuwait in just 4 days. Iraq's forces faced overwhelming defeat, leading to the acceptance of a ceasefire on February 28, 1991. The Gulf War had a profound social impact on America as well. The war was widely supported by the American public, who saw it as a just response to aggression and a means to safeguard regional stability and global oil supplies. However, it also raised concerns about the long-term implications of American military intervention in the Middle East. The war demonstrated the efficiency of American military power and solidified the perception of the United States as the world's sole superpower. Casualties on both sides were significant. The coalition forces, primarily led by the United States, reported 379 fatalities and 776 wounded. On the Iraqi side, the numbers were much higher, with estimates ranging from 25,000 to even 100,000 military deaths and a larger number of civilian casualties. The war also had devastating environmental consequences, as Iraqi forces set fire to Kuwaiti oil wells, resulting in one of the largest oil spills in history. Other notable belligerents included countries from across the world, forming a diverse coalition against Iraq. This included many NATO members, such as the United Kingdom. The coalition comprised countries from Europe, Asia and the Middle East, making it a truly global effort to stop Iraqi aggression. The Gulf War had far-reaching implications for America and the world. For the United States, it reinforced the image of an unrivaled military power and further solidified its role as the world's preeminent superpower. The war also established the concept of a new world order, with the United States emerging as the principal enforcer of international norms and a defender of global stability after the end of the Cold War. From a global perspective, the Gulf War marked the first major post-Cold War conflict and set a precedent for subsequent military interventions in the Middle East. It also highlighted the complex interplay between geopolitics and energy resources, particularly oil, which remains a central factor in international relations to this day. Chapter 5. The Yugoslav Wars. The various Yugoslav wars which occurred in the 1990s were a complex and devastating series of conflicts that marked a significant challenge for America and the international community. At the time, the United States was experiencing the aftermath of the Cold War, and the dissolution of Yugoslavia presented a new and unexpected crisis. The motivation behind the wars stemmed from long-standing ethnic and nationalist tensions between the multi-ethnic groups of Yugoslavia, leading to demands for independence from various regions. As Yugoslavia began to disintegrate, violence erupted, and different regions sought self-determination, which resulted in the Bosnian War, the Croatian War of Independence, and the Kosovo War, among others. The Bosnian War, lasting from 1992 to 1995, was one of the most brutal and protracted conflicts, with Bosnia-Herzegovina declaring independence from Yugoslavia. Ethnic divisions led to horrific atrocities, including the Srebrenica massacre, where thousands of Bosniak men and boys were killed by Bosnian Serb forces. The war saw major battles such as the Siege of Sarajevo, a long and brutal siege that resulted in thousands of civilian deaths. The Croatian War of Independence, fought from 1991 to 1995, arose as Croatia sought independence from Yugoslavia. The war involved ethnic tensions and territorial disputes, leading to conflicts like the Battle of Vukovar, where the city was heavily damaged and besieged for months. The war concluded with the signing of the Dayton Agreement, establishing a tenuous peace in the region. The Kosovo War, fought in 1998 to 1999, was a conflict between ethnic Albanian separatists and Yugoslav forces in the province of Kosovo. The war escalated with atrocities on both sides, including the massacre of Račak, which prompted international intervention. NATO launched airstrikes against Yugoslavia, leading to the withdrawal of Yugoslav forces from Kosovo and the establishment of a United Nations administration in the region. Throughout the Yugoslav wars, the international community, including the United States, struggled to respond effectively. The wars caused massive displacement, with millions of people forced to flee their homes, leading to a huge refugee crisis. The conflict also raised concerns about human rights violations and the need for humanitarian intervention. Casualties on all sides were significant. In the Bosnian War, an estimated 100,000 people were killed, with over 2 million displaced. The Croatian War resulted in around 20,000 deaths, while the Kosovo War saw thousands of people killed and nearly 900,000 displaced. The social impact of the Yugoslav wars was profound. The conflicts exposed the limitations of international institutions and highlighted the challenges of responding to complex humanitarian crises. The war also brought about issues of genocide, ethnic cleansing and war crimes to the forefront of international consciousness for the first time since the end of World War II. This led to the establishment of the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, the ICTY, to prosecute war criminals. From America's perspective, the Yugoslav wars posed a difficult dilemma. The United States, along with NATO and the international community, grappled with how to respond to the unfolding crises. Humanitarian concerns and a desire to prevent further atrocities drove the decision to intervene in some instances such as the Kosovo War. However, the interventions also raised debate about the limits of military engagement and the role of the United States as a global policeman. The Yugoslav wars had broader implications for the world. They highlighted the fragility of multi-ethnic states and the risks of allowing long-standing grievances to fester. The conflict served as a stark reminder for the challenges of maintaining peace and stability in post-Cold War Europe. The wars also shaped the concept of the responsibility to protect, emphasising the international community's responsibility to prevent and respond to mass atrocities. When looking back at America's various involvements in wars since 1945, there is a clear variety. By that, I mean that some wars have been etched into public consciousness, such as the Vietnam War, where some have been left to be forgotten, such as the Korean War or the invasion of Grenada. Whether the war left a lasting legacy or not, they should all be remembered, least of all for the sake of the servicemen and women who fought in them. And as I mentioned at the start of the video, this list is not exhaustive. Many videos could be made about the Vietnam War, the Korean War, the Gulf War, any of these wars. So if you want a part 2, or a more in-depth dive at one of these specific wars, then please let us know in the comments below. Please remember to like and subscribe, and to hit the notification bell so you never miss a video. But most importantly, I hope you all have a great day.